Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to the Epic Dad Legacy Podcast. Hey, today I've got on George Bryant. George is a former Marine, a New York Times best-selling author, a top-ranking podcast host, and one of the most highly sought-after digital marketing consultants in the world. He's a heart-centered entrepreneur, wearer of cut-off hoodies and pink shoes, but most importantly, George is a dad. I had the chance to meet George, I don't know, probably close to a year ago at an event out in amazing Montana, and just a hugely impactful, journey for me. One from a business perspective, but then two from personal development, and really just to learn some principles about fatherhood and leadership. And George, I am super pumped to have you on the show, man. What did we talk about?
Yeah, we talked about all the things that I didn't want to share since I'm drenched in sweat right now. But we talked about integrity. We talked about presence. We talked about eliminating entitlement, about living with our life, about focusing on what matters, building containers. And I gave a lot of answers that I never wanted to hear, but they were the most powerful answers that I ever got. So I wanted to share them with everybody. And don't worry, I don't call you out. I call myself out. But I feel like if you take one nugget away from this show, it's guaranteed to drastically improve the relationships in your life in general, both as a man, as a father. And if you happen to be a mom listening to this as well, you can just kind of slide it into your hubby's DMs and make him get some too.
There you go. And then also about oregano too. Everyone needs to
go. Yeah, and oil of oregano. Oh yeah, you did hit record at the beginning of that one. Yeah, so fighting the razor blades in my throat. But we talked through, we got it done. We had a blast. We laughed. I almost cried at one point. But I think it was really, really powerful. And thank you for having me.
Absolutely, George. Well, guys, excited for this conversation, and let's hop into the episode. Are you ready to become the dad you know you are meant to be? Good, because this is the Epic Dad Legacy Podcast, where imperfect action is better than perfect ideas, promises kept are more important than promises made, and nothing happens unless you make it happen. My name is Drew, father of three, and founder of the Epic Dad Company. My mission is to help dads up their game and become the husbands, fathers, and men they're called to be. Thanks for listening. Now let's start the episode.
And I was like, she's like, how do you take that stuff? I'm like, it kills everything. Like every time I get sick, it's oregano and elderberry. And like 2 days I'm better. And she's like, how are you better so fast? I'm like, because I'm willing to deal with that. And then it kills everything.
Oil of oregano. Does it taste like just straight oregano? Yeah.
Yeah. You know, like the hint you get in pizza sauce?
Yeah.
Times that by 1,000,000. And it's just dead straight. Like it's pure oregano extract, but it's like one of the best, like antiviral microbial thing. And I have the pills too, and I take them, but they don't work as much as it does of just putting the straight shit on your tongue.
It'll just kick out any virus you got in like 24
hours.
Dude,
I'm telling you, I beat COVID both times in about, 24 hours.
Really?
Yeah.
I've never tried that oregano. I'll have to give it a shot.
Yeah, dude, it's this is the only good one. This is what the bottle looks like. It's called oil of oregano. It's like oil of wild oregano, super strength, Mediterranean source, healthy immune support.
Where do you get that from? Do you just pick it up at like Walmart or something? You order it online?
No, like they have it at like most like grocery store / like pharmacy stuff. It's a pretty big brand. But even Craig's like, I'm sick. I'm like, try this. He's like, fuck you, but I feel better.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to give that a shot. I don't know. The only like weird things I take, I try to do like a daily regimen. I'd say the only weird thing in it is I do what is it? Garlic. It's like garlic extract.
It's supposed to be really good super good. Well. Yeah. So similar things, right? Like as homeopathic and normal as possible. But every time, I mean, I don't get sick. And given my schedule, it's kind of shocking.
Yeah.
Like, cause even though I have razor blades in my throat, I still went to the gym yesterday and like thrashed myself. And my wife's like, that's not good. I'm like, I'll feel fine. It's probably better.
Just
I work
sweat it out. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I literally took like 3 grams of niacin. So I flushed everything. And then she's like, did you go out in the sun today? I'm like, no, babe, that's all the niacin. It's just flushing out everything in my body right now. She's like, you're a psycho. And I was like, yeah, well, it's better than taking pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, I feel like that's how I beat COVID the first time was just going and working out. Like I felt like kind of sick, but I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go work it out of my system and sweat for like 2 days and it was gone,
That's it, man. Go sit in the sauna for, 2 hours in like the death zone and just get it all out. Yeah.
Well, George, thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, man.
So I've been wanting to do this one for a while for sure. Cause I'll kind of have you go through your background and stuff like that for guys that don't know you. But I imagine you talk business all day, every day. And so I kind of wanted to bring you on and talk about something different and, talk about fatherhood. So I'm excited for the conversation, man. But for guys that don't know you, and you guys should know George, absolutely. If you're not in his world, you definitely should be. But give guys a little bit of a background on you, and then we can dive more into kind of your early days from going from Marine Corps to caveman and all that stuff. But give guys a little synopsis of who George is.
Yeah, I'll give everybody, I'll be nice. I'll give everybody like the 90-second, 2-minute version, and then we can dive into all the relevant parts. So just for good scene setting, grew up outside of Boston, Massachusetts, pretty tumultuous childhood, drug abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse. I mean, like, to give context, both my front teeth were knocked out 4 times by the time I was 12. My nose was broken 3 times, beat up, bullied, overweight, social services, caseworkers, emancipation, homelessness from probably 12 on, between couch surfing, friends' basements, and just basically knew I had to make a choice to either stay there and die or leave and do something different. So I did what any non-intelligent, stupid kid would do, and I joined the Marine Corps. So I forged my parents' signature, and I was like, great, let me go do the hardest thing that's going to turn my trauma into a deadly weapon and make it even worse. And so I joined the Marine Corps 2000. Actually, it's really funny. We're coming up July 29th, 2002. I went to boot camp, and that was it. It was like my escape. And I was like, great, I have a home. These people love my trauma. They make me feel good about it. And then the more disconnected and broken I am, the better I do at my job. And so it was kind of a really shitty world to be in. But I ended up doing 13 years in the Marine Corps, 2004, 2005, almost lost my legs in Somalia, spent 12 months in a wheelchair, and they tried to medically separate me, but I was more scared about going home than I was about staying in. And so I broke every rule in the book. They wanted to amputate my legs. I told them to fuck off. Ended up making a full recovery and then doing 8 more years on active duty. So another Afghanistan pump, ended up getting 7 concussions in 3 years, bleeding on my brain, fluid on my brain. I'm like, I'm fine, guys, I'm fine. And then right at the 12-year mark, they're like, hey, listen, we're medically separating you. And I was like, what do you mean? I'm good. And but luckily, when I was in Afghanistan, I got lucky. I found paleo by accident. I started CrossFitting 2009 in the not the early days, but pretty much before everybody knew what it was. And that led me to paleo, which led me to actually eating clean and trying to take care of myself, after I lost my dad to cancer and a ton of other stuff. And it was a really, really good thing for me. But not many people knew that I struggle with bulimia. I mean, I was in porta potties in Afghanistan purging because of control issues from my childhood and the things I didn't work on. So I started eating paleo, but back in 2009, gluten-free and paleo wasn't really a thing.
Yeah.
And so when I came home, I'm like, I really want to beat this. Like, I don't want to die. I don't want to be like this, but I'm going to have to teach myself how to cook. And luckily I started documenting it on the internet. And this was when I had to make a fake college email to get a Facebook account so that I could be on Facebook and post recipes. And I'm glad that I did, because it ended up turning into a pretty big passion project. I ended up kind of accidentally becoming an entrepreneur. I fell into food blogging, and in typical fashion, like growing up with this complex of being poor and having nothing, I didn't invest money in anything. I didn't go to business school. I didn't go to marketing school. I figured it all out myself, which was an incredible resilient skill set to have. And so fast forward 2 years, I ended up having one of the biggest paleo food blogs on the internet. My first ever digital product made $1 million, which was not a good thing, because when the tax man came at the end of the year and he's like, all right, you owe 240 grand in taxes. And I was like, well, I have 2 cars, a house, and about 11 grand in my bank account. And so started learning entrepreneurial lessons pretty early, but that career went pretty good. Multi-7-figure blog, launched a book, became a New York Times bestseller, launched an app, hit #1 in the world, while I was dying on the inside and basically changing my addiction from opiates to dopamine to social media. And it almost cost me my entire life and my family when I attempted my life. And so fast forward a couple years, my wife was 8 months pregnant. We were about 3 weeks away from bankruptcy. And I did what no smart man would do. I walked away from a 7-figure company because it was misaligned and it was killing me. And I basically started from scratch. I deleted my social, deleted my email, changed my phone number, and I disappeared off the face of the earth for about 3 years. And I was blessed to have developed a skill set that people had seen, and they started calling me and asking me to help them build their business, help them scale their marketing, scale their companies, which was a beautiful place for me to be because there was no ego, there was no validation. I was just helping other people. And it allowed me the space to really genuinely like dive in and heal. I started personal development. I started plant medicine, breath work, EMDR, cognitive processing therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, breath work, stillness practices, group therapy. I mean, you name it, I did it. Stem cells. I mean, everything you can imagine. And it was a pretty dark period, but I started to get some traction and feel better, my family, my life, and rebuild. And then I know it was about 3 years ago. My wife's like, hey, babe, you talk too fucking much. I love you. But I need you to have an outlet again, and you're kind of healed. So can you go back on the internet and help people? Like, because that's what you're supposed to be doing. And so about 3 years ago, I came back out of the woodwork. Nobody knew where I went. And I was like, all right, I'm going to disrupt the marketing industry, and I'm going to help everybody build a bigger business, build a bigger impact, and not steal their money. And so fast forward till today, I run a mastermind, an event, a podcast. I own 5 to 6 companies.
You had to think about that a little bit.
I do. Well, like I changed the number, but I have all these things going on. And like, I just took equity in a new company, and we're trying to do 100 million this year. And so my brain tries to calculate where everything is right now. But now I spend my time doing everything I can to help people. You know, I prioritize my family. I prioritize people. Like, I genuinely believe that everybody needs to be reminded that there's human beings on the other side of everything that we do. And I luckily carved out a niche to where I love what I do and it doesn't feel like work. And I get to meet incredible people like you and talk every day, which, by the way, I still take your pre-workout. It's incredible.
Yeah.
And I get to spend my time doing what I love, but it's very family first. Like I moved my family to Montana. I live in heaven. I work 3 to 4 hours a day. I spend the rest of my time with my family, hiking, fishing, in nature, just connecting with people the most that I can, and really understanding that there is no finish line. Life is now, and I'm never going to get that time back. And I'm blessed that I understand that lesson at a very young 39, even though my body feels like it's 100. But that's kind of how we get to today.
Yeah, well, a lot to unpack there.
I told you. I mean, it was like 4 minutes, but like,
you said 30 seconds.
You wanted the whole story, we'd have a 7-hour podcast.
So, a lot to unpack, and I really want to dive into, like you said, hey, family first, right? And that's the focus for you, and kind of prioritizing the family, setting up your schedule that way. I want to get to that point, but before we do, I want to kind of backtrack just a little bit, right? And kind of go back to early days of George joining the Marine Corps, and kind of dive into that, right? Like, I've seen you be around. What's your son's name again?
Branson.
Branson. Yeah. So I've seen you be around Branson at your event. And it was just awesome, right? Like to see him walk up on stage and say, "Hey, Daddy," and like it's obvious that you are extremely passionate about being a father. And so, like, where does that stem from, and kind of how does that trauma that you had, from when you were a child, kind of play into the way that you want to parent now?
Yeah, that's such a good question. Yeah, I mean, it's easy now. He's almost 6, and I'd say the last 3 years has been really about presence, but it's an edge that I still flex every day. But my father was an incredible man, but he had his own demons, right? He was a drug addict. He saw 5 fathers come and go and beat the shit out of him and his mother. Like, he watched his dad die in a car accident. His brother die in a car accident. He was a Vietnam vet. Like, my dad was riddled with demons from every addiction you can imagine. But I always remember the one thing, that no matter what demons my dad had, and no matter how disconnected and really like empty my bucket was with him, he always told me how incredibly proud of me he was. Like, he always acknowledged me. He always talked about me. And it took me many, many years to be able to put myself in that shoes and empathize with that situation. Because, for most of my life, it was like, oh, my parents don't care. And, all the narratives that I had. And really, quite frankly, my introduction to parenthood was when my daughter became my bonus daughter, and she was 6 years old. And so I went from no kids to a 6-year-old bonus daughter that was somebody else's child. And that, lasted for 4 or 5 years before we had our son. And I thought parenting was easy. Like, I'm like, oh, I'm going to have kids. I'm going to check the box. I'm going to take care of them. blah, 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 like providing is putting a roof over their head and giving them money and, doing all those things. And then I didn't realize that having kids is a forced 20-year therapy session instantaneously. Because what started to happen with my son is that, the first 2 years I was pretty absent. I was still pretty in like dark demons. My wife was basically raising him and I was quote unquote checking the boxes, right? Like I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
We have $1 million business. We have $1 million life. Boom, boom, boom. But I was so fucking absent. Like I was not here. It was like my body was a shell. And it's because my son ended up being a mirror for my earliest memories of like what I wanted at that age and where I wanted to be and what I wanted to feel. And so it was a very, very big edge that I had to really lean into. And it's something I practice every day, but I mean, it doesn't go away. Like last night, I'm sick and I say no to my son and then I cry 5 minutes later because I don't want to say no. And I was like, but I don't have the capacity to say yes. And I'm judging myself and boom, boom, boom. But yet I'm like, how's your bucket? And he's like, full, daddy. And I'm like, okay, here we go again, making up stuff about myself. But one of the things that I really, really learned from my father was very resilient. He was a hard worker. Most people never knew he was an addict because he always stayed true to his word. He kept his integrity. And he was the only drug addict I knew that would willingly give up drugs to help his family. Like if I ever asked for money, he would literally willingly go through withdrawals and lend me money without ever telling me because I didn't know he was an addict at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's some very big, deep principles that I learned from my father through both his action and inaction that really, really helped me. But one of the things that I think is really, really important to me is presence, right? Like I spent most of my childhood trying to survive. And it took me 7 figures and, 20 years of therapy to get to today's point. And that's not the world that I want my kids to grow up in. And so it's a muscle that requires a lot of attention and a lot of flexing. And it's hard. I mean, I still cry probably 6-7 times a week as I'm seeing my son at 5.5 and remembering when I was 5.5 and like what I wanted versus what I can give him now and what story I want him to tell and what narrative I want him to tell and how I want him to feel. And so I think I'm blessed that I had the foresight to do the work and I'm open to leaning into it and really looking in the mirror hard and having a lot of hard conversations with my wife, i.e. receiving a lot of hard feedback from my wife on, my lack of presence sometimes or my check boxes or my passive aggressive nature with humor when I'm deflecting and, things along those lines. But I think it's really been powerful because every day I get a chance to try and I get a chance to play. And, one of the things I love about my son, and I hate to make this comparison, but as of right now, he reminds me of my pit bull who just passed away because like a moment later, he's back in the moment and doesn't remember. He just wants the presence in that moment. He wants the love in that moment. He wants that connection in that moment. And like, I don't raise my voice at my son. I don't yell at my son. I don't do any of those things, but there's still times and pockets where, I have 39 years of programming that a 5.5-year-old's helping me unprogram every day. Well, I also have a 17-year-old that's helping me really unpack a lot of stuff as a father.
Yeah, I can imagine a 17-year-old girl. Yeah, mine are 6 and 4, and they're already, they're already tested.
And so, I think it really boils down to like what it really boils down to is choice, right? Like nobody hands us a manual. Nobody says this is how you do it, but it's the willingness to take it on every day. And I realized that normally when it comes to parenting and being a husband, the more uncomfortable I am, the more comfortable everybody else is. And that means finding those edges and how can I be present and how can I reinvent myself and how can I speak differently? How can I ask better questions? How can I empathize more? And really practicing and flexing that muscle of presence, regardless of what's happening in the world around us, like that family unit's the number one. And, if I had to give myself a grade, I'm probably at like a B- right now, which I'll take, right? Since I was like a 1.1 GPA student. So it's a B- with a lot of room for growth and things that I focus on every day. But I have a lot of empathy for my parents. And I think in all the work that I've done, really putting myself in their shoes and understanding that, yes, my mom was absent and basically brain dead, but she was also the youngest of 11 and was sexually traumatized her whole life. And my father got beat by his first 5 fathers and became a drug addict. And when I really got to go into that, not from the wound of, oh, my parents fucked me over, or they didn't care, or they gave me that, but really hearing that and understanding what it was like on the other side and putting myself in those shoes and finding love and finding compassion and finding empathy has allowed me to create something different. And my wife says, and she reminds me quite often, that we broke the generational pattern. Like, we broke it. The generational trauma is gone.
Yeah.
Like,
And
my kids
I
grow up.
love, I don't know if you've seen, there's this one like meme or infographic or whatever you call it, right? It has, about like 7 or 8 burned matches right in a row, right? And then it has one match that is just down just a little bit, right? And the fire didn't catch it, right? And then continue down that path, they haven't burned, right? And so I think, you're right. Like, it takes one generation, and like one father to change that narrative, like regardless of what you went through as a child, regardless of what your father, what your mother went through as a child. And so, 100% agree with that. And then 2, like, it's kind of eye-opening to put yourself in your position of your parents, right? Like, now that I am a father, I can look back at them and say, all right, they're human beings. They were going through their own stuff. Like, nobody knows, what's going on. Everybody's just trying their best. And you touched on something too, just presence. I think that's huge. Like, at the core of it, I think every kid just wants to be seen, heard, and understood and accepted. And so by having that, even if it's just 5 minutes a day, right, of just like being actually present with your child, like letting them know that like you are the most important thing right now. I hear you, I understand you, I accept you. It's just going to be huge. And then I challenge with this, I'm challenged and I struggle with this and fail every day as well. But the nice thing is, right, is kids have extremely short memories. And so like the next day, right, I've got another opportunity to do this. Like the next hour, I've got another opportunity to do this. And so, just awesome points there, George.
Yeah. And I don't want to stand on like a soapbox too, because like it's work. It's a muscle. Like, I think about breaking generational trauma, and then I fast forward 3 years and my daughter goes to a personal development course, and I know I'm going to get a phone call and like stuff we're going to have to clear, that I had the best intention and things that are there. But I think it's the willingness to be in the unit. It's the willingness to lean in. It's the willingness to put my ego aside and really hear and understand, not from an agendized place, from a true place of like listening and understanding. Like, none of us are perfect. And I think that it's an incredible gift to be a parent and to understand. And I think this is like a philosophy that we carry, and my wife and I have to thank my wife for this one, is that my job is not to create a mini version of me or to create a human in the world. My job is to create a container that allows this human to develop into whoever they want to be, and love and support them for what that is. And, I find that edge a lot, like trying to tell my son how to do things or how to think a certain way, but he's not me and he's never going to be me. My job is to help him think his way and find his path. And that's its own different edge of like finding, because I'm like, wait, I still don't know who the fuck I am. Like, wait, how, okay, cool. Ask better questions and be here. But I really think it boils down to that intention. And you're right. It's about presence. It's about really, and this is a big one. Craig and I talk about this a lot on High Speed Daddy. It's about really being honest with ourselves, right? For years, I'm like, oh, I'm doing this for my family. I'm doing this for my family.
Yeah, but are you really?
Right? Yeah, of course, right? But if I was to ask my 4-year-old, hey, do you want daddy on 155 flights this year to have some number in the bank account that you'll never fucking see? Of course he wouldn't have said yes, right? There was this dissonance that I created to where now I still have guilt when I travel. I still have certain things that are there, but there's an acceptable level that comes from a place of like living our life and doing the best that we can do, but also just having a very radical, honest look at why we're doing it and being willing to question it and being willing to have the hard conversation. Like, wait, okay, I've been saying this for a year, but are my actions really aligning to what I'm saying? And if the answer is no, it's the willingness to get a little uncomfortable and have those hard conversations with yourself and be like, okay, cool. How can I reprioritize? How can I focus? How can I fill their bucket? How can I change the structure? And I mean, it's crazy, because I think some of the most powerful business decisions I've ever made, including the ones that have lost me the most amount of money, made me the happiest because they were helping me realign to what mattered. And it's just this pursuit, right? It's this pursuit of like what we really want to happen. And I think I also have a very different perspective, because I thought when my daughter turned 18, I'm like, okay, I have till she's 18. Well, I miscalculated the point when she got her license and we got her a car that I wasn't going to see her again. right? Because like every day she's hiking, camping, fishing, and I love it. But I'm like, wait, she's like out there, and
Yeah, it changes the dynamic.
I'm like, hey, can I get in your calendar so we can go to the movies? Like, do you want to go hiking?
Yeah,
Like,
you want to
she's
hang
like,
out?
yeah, Dad, let's go, right? And it's a really big perspective shift for me, and it's a beautiful barometer for me to see every day, because then I have my son who's about to be 6, who's always, and I mean, the kid has an Energizer battery stuck up his ass constantly. Like, it doesn't turn off, doesn't matter if he naps, like whatever. The kid is from like 6 a.m. until midnight, and he's got an unlimited gas tank. And he pushes my edge, man. Like when I'm like 8:30 and I've done 6 podcasts today and 3 coaching calls and ran $100 million business. And he's like, Daddy, let's go play. Let's go run. Let's go hike. Let's go fish. And I'm like, just say yes. Just say yes. Like, I'll find it. Like, I'll find it. Right. I've done this. I've deployed before. I can find this energy. And I think it's just the willingness to play the game. It's the willingness to lean in. It's the willingness to realize that if my brain is telling me one thing, it's probably wrong. And I should just say yes and just go do it and try and see where it goes. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing, man.
Yeah. Well, I want to dig into, like you just talked about, right? Like in the morning, you've done 4 podcasts and 6 meetings, blah blah blah. Like obviously, you have an extremely busy schedule, George, and so I would love to know, like, how do you take a look at your day, at your week, and kind of plan that out, right? To make sure that one,
Yeah.
I do have a responsibility, right, to make some money to provide for my family. Like that is a responsibility. And I want to make sure that I do that the most effectively, right? I'm sure guys do as well. And so, how do you look at the day, and how do you schedule your time, and what containers do you put around yourself to make sure that you can be the most effective, one, when you're at work, but then 2, when you're with family, you can actually be with family?
Yeah, it's an amazing question, and it's one that is a dance, and I've been dancing with this for 15 years of being an entrepreneur. But I think where I am now in the current season, I haven't nailed. And at the end of the day, the containers are up to me. Nobody else is going to build them. Nobody else is going to tell me. Nobody else is going to say yes or no or good job or you should do it differently. Like the amount of times when I'm off and I go to my wife for a permission slip, she just doesn't give me one, which is great. She holds me accountable. But now, like, I realize that I'm at my best when I focus on things that matter, right? So, like, for me, I teach this at our events, but even to our students, I have what I call my sacred light keeper quadrants. Like, these are the 4 things that help me be the best version of myself every single day, right? So my mind, my body, my being, and my soul. And I used to have my wife take the kids to school every day, and then I would get home, I'd make dinner, I'd do all that stuff. And we moved a lot, and we have a lot going on. And about 6 months ago, I was like, I'm going to do this different. And so now I am the one in the morning. I get my wife up, my kids up, I make their lunch. I get my wife out the door to the ranch, and then I take my kids to school. My daughter drives herself, but I make sure I'm there. And then I don't even start my work day until I've dropped my son off at school. And so I used to start working at 7:30, be done by 3. Now I start working at 10. And I'm typically done by 2:30, so that I can be home. I can make sure that when he gets home from school, or that when my wife gets home or my daughter gets home, I can cook dinner, I can clean up around the house. And so I've adjusted that container a ton to make sure that I am setting myself up to win. And so the way that it currently works is that when I'm here, when I'm in town, I'm up at 6 every single day. I wake up, I make my son's lunch, then I wake him up, I get him showered, get him breakfast, wake my wife up, say good morning to my daughter, get them out the door, pack him in the car. We go on our morning excursion, take him to school. I drop him off. And then the rest of the world gets me. And so I've prioritized my family first in the morning. And I realize that it's kind of like my superpower. There's nothing that'll replace that 5.5-year-old in the car with me in the parking lot at school for 15 minutes, playing tag in the car or tickling or laughing or watching a movie together. And it kind of makes it a superpower. And then because of that forced container, Parkinson's law, knowing that I don't really want to work after 3 p.m., it also changes the lens in which I see my day, how I prioritize, where I spend my time, like what big needle movers I have, because I used to work 7 to midnight, 7 to 1, 7 to 2. And I'm like, oh, I'm doing this for our family. Yeah, shut the fuck up. I was sacrificing myself and like killing any ability to live my life with my kids after. And so same thing, like when I log off at 3 p.m. and I head out, I leave work at work.
Mhm.
And occasionally I'll open my phone, like I'll do stuff if I have some downtime, if my son's playing with a nanny or he's out or my wife and my kids go somewhere. I find these pockets to where my family needs are met, but I can use that time. But most of the time I find myself just relaxing or vegging or filling my own bucket, going to the gym, doing things like that. But it basically became a non-negotiable that my family has to come first now. And so
Yeah.
that means when I used to come into the office and record on weekends and courses and podcasts, like, nope, no
Yeah.
more. And that means if on Saturday morning, all I'm doing is carting my kids around, or he wants to go to the park, or he wants to go hike, or he wants to go do blank or go on an adventure, I just say yes.
Yeah.
And I realized that everything else can wait, right? Like nothing's going to die. No one's going to die if I don't work on a Friday night at 8 p.m. because I don't respond to your fucking Slack message. Like everything's going to be okay. And it's been really, really beautiful because I didn't used to have, no matter how many times I taught containers, I didn't have the integrity and the discipline to maintain mine, but now I authentically do. And I don't think I even acknowledge myself enough because like I'm so happy as a pig in shit thinking about it because it helps me be so focused and so laser and so spot on. And then I am prioritizing what's there, knowing that life happens because my son does see me work. Like this morning, he's like, "Daddy, are you working today?" I'm like, "I am." And he's like, "Then why were you home when I got home?" And I was like, and I laughed about it for a minute. And then I thought about it on my drive this morning. And I was like, that's really what I want my son to see. Like,
Mm.
I want him to be fucking shocked that he thinks I'm at work. And the moment he gets home, I'm there to tickle him when he walks in the door. And so, and obviously, like, I'm an entrepreneur, right? So I make my own schedule. That's not necessarily the case with some people who work 9 to 5s or have another
Mhm.
job. But there's always ways to challenge what's there. And there's
Yeah.
always ways to build containers and create solutions. But a lot of the times it requires out of the box thinking. Because a year ago, Drew, if you're like, "Hey, George, you're not going to start working till 10 a.m., I would have been like, "Fuck you." My day's normally done by 10 a.m., right? Like
Yeah.
I was at the gym at 4:30, right? Like in the office by 6:30. And it was like record, 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 call, run company meeting, boom, boom, boom. And by 10 a.m., I'm like, all right, I'm like done. And now I'm like, I start at 10 and I'm either getting old because I'm falling in love with it, or I really just appreciate that time because there's also going to be a time in 4 years where my son's up, getting himself up, ready out the door, and he's at school at 7 a.m. And I'm not going to have these morning commutes where I get to sit in the car with him until 9 a.m.
Yeah.
And my willingness to dance with that container is what I love, and just constantly ask myself and audit, like, is this working? Is this what I want? Is this where I want to be spending my time? And right now, the answer is yes. I probably pissed a lot of people off when they're like, "I can't get on your calendar. You didn't get back to me." I'm like, great. But I got back to my wife and my kids. And quite frankly, they're the ones that I have to sleep with. And she's not making me sleep on the couch. And so as of right now, I have no space to hear your bullshit. Great.
Yeah.
I'll get
And
back to you later.
what I love about that too, though, is like you acknowledge, hey, this isn't for everyone, right? Like this is for you, and this
Mm-hmm.
exact moment in time, this is what works, right? So as you start to think about guys that have 9 to 5s, and I do that as well, right? Like I work a regular corporate job, and I'm trying to run a company on the side, and I've got 3 kids, and I've got a wife, and everything, right? And I've got to stay in shape as well. So I mean, there's like everybody has their own shit, and like you've
Yep.
got to find what works for you. And so that may work for me, doesn't work for the next guy, but like for me, what I found is, hey, I have to get up early. Like I just have to. Like when I look at time, and I'm like, all right, if I want to be present with my family, but I need to get stuff done, like I need to prioritize that before they're even up, right? And I'll
Yep.
sacrifice some sleep, whatever I have to do to get that time done, so that once they're up, I can help welcome them into the world. I can be the present, engaged dad that I want to be. And then head to work, right? So I think it's gonna be different for everybody where you're at and what phase of life that you have. But I will tell you this though, COVID has opened up a lot of opportunities. And we already talked about it, before. And like, obviously, hey, nobody likes a pandemic. But I think what happened is it accelerated the shift to kind of a more remote, lifestyle. And
Yep.
so even if you're at a 9 to 5, I guarantee you're not in the office every day, right? And
Yep.
so, you got to look at your calendar and say, hey, how can I prioritize what I think is important, especially now that I'm working remote, at least partially. If you don't need to be in the office, like have that conversation with your boss, right? About, hey, I'm just as effective at home as I am at the office. And, I can take that time back from commuting and give myself an hour, to be with my family, and then I'll be more productive when I'm at work. And so I think
Yep.
there's a lot of room for those conversations for guys that that don't quite own their schedule as much as, guys like you and I might.
Yeah, well, and like I'll be honest, like my schedule's pretty loose. Like my team hates it. If they look at my calendar, a lot of it's empty because I prefer this like freedom of like really leaning into what feels the best in that moment. But I think one of the challenges that I see a lot of is everybody's measurement window is too fucking small. It's too small, right? Like I don't look at like what I'm going to get done today. I look at what I'm going to get done this month. Right. And that includes my family. Right. And so I travel, right? Like at least a week and a half, 2 weeks out of the month, I'm traveling. But I'm like, great. So when I'm in my hotel room from 5 p.m. until 11, when I go to bed and my family's not there, that's my sprint time. Right. Like I am like in it. Right. And so I also think that, and it doesn't matter because like when I was in the Marine Corps, I was an active duty Marine as a staff NCO and I had 55 Marines and I was running Civilized Caveman. But my work schedule was like 4 a.m. I typically leave my house at 4 to get to PT at 4:45. And then I was lucky if I was home by 8 p.m. But I was blogging every single day, cooking recipes. And so I would sprint on the weekend. I would cook, I would photograph, I would write. And then all I would have to do is post at night, right? And then I would catch up. And I think if we change our measurement window too, to realize that like, rigidity doesn't equal results, right? And so if we prioritize what's important in our life, like what our actual buckets are, like physical health is an incredibly important bucket for all of us. Like every fucking man, you better sweat. It's just like the only thing that like guarantees your groundedness, your structure, your presence. Like I don't care which way you slice it, sweat, right? But I used to train 2.5 hours a day. But quite frankly, I don't miss being a sadistic fuck. And I'm completely fine if that day I'm like, hey, I'm in my office. I'm going to knock out 100 kettlebell swings, 100 pull-ups, and go for a 20-minute walk, right? And having the flexibility and the relationship to be able to audit and adjust. And then what I do now is my wife's like, hey, I'm taking Branson this weekend to the horse show. I know you don't want to go have fun. I'm like, great. I'm going on a 6-hour hike. Let's go, right? And having this like beautiful relationship to where it's not so rigid and it doesn't have to be perfect and it doesn't have to be so transactional in nature, but it allows us to go with the flow. And I think by changing the measurement window, it's huge, right? And like all we can really control is our inputs, and to-do lists are not our inputs, right? Like those are things that have to be done, but it's how we do them and what we're really focused on. And I'd rather work out 8 times a month and make progress than put it in my schedule to work out 90 minutes and then miss it and feel guilty about it and then do 0 and regress backwards, because no matter what, we operate in seasons, right? Like there's seasons for my family. There's seasons for my business. There's seasons for my friendships. There's seasons for everything. And I think really just taking this holistic look at it and looking at it more of a long-term game, right? Like I'd rather you train twice a week for 8 weeks than break yourself every day for 2 weeks to compensate and then not have the energy, the capacity, your cortisol's up, your adrenals are shot, you're not sleeping and you're doing it. And so I think it's really just having the willingness to dance with that relationship in that container and not go to rigidity so much.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And I did an interview with a guy a few months back, and he kind of keyed me in on something like an approach. Like I feel like that's kind of my typical go-to is just like, all right, cool, I got a goal. I'm gonna do this X, Y, Z, and like knock it out. And then I get burnt out, right? And I'm like, oh shit. And I miss something. I feel like shit, So he let me know about this concept that he has about minimum standards. And so what you could really do is switch that from like on a physical stance to like what you can do at work is really what you say, or hey, what are your needle movers, right? And like, what are the things that I know are going to move myself forward? And like, how do I make sure that I'm making progress on those? And it may not be every day, right? But and on the physical fitness side, he talks about minimum standards from like, all right, if my ultimate goal is to work out, 5 times a week or whatever, right? Like, all right, life happens, etc. I'm gonna have to juggle multiple things. I may miss a workout. So like, that's a great goal to shoot for, right? But if you think about what do I actually want to achieve and like, what's my minimum standard? Hey, I might just go to the gym twice this week. And like, I'm going to call that a win, because I know that life happens and I know I'm still moving forward, and making progress. And if I hit 5 a week, fantastic, but if I don't, I'm not going to feel like shit about it. So anyway, that was just a cool concept that he let me know. And
let me say something about this too. I teach this too. I call it my wedge of expectations. It's along the same lines, right? And it's protecting our momentum and our mindset to understand that the measurement window can change. But I'm gonna say what nobody wants to hear either. I don't give a fuck who you are, because I used to work corporate and I used to work 9 to 5. You're not working 8 fucking hours a day. I don't give a fuck which way you slice it, right? And this lack of integrity with time is one of the biggest problems that we have. And everyone's like, oh, you're an asshole. Great. Open screen time on your phone, motherfucker.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah, pull up your Instagram
and
app
dive in.
and
And listen, I don't want you to feel bad and wrong. I don't want you to feel guilty. I don't even want you to lie to me. I will tell you, there's 2 fucking phones on my game, 2 games on my phone that during the week I probably play for 6 hours a week, because when I'm sitting in the parking lot and I'm waiting, like they're like some random like ball game where I shoot blocks away from balls and I'm like fucking addicted to it, right? And the same thing too, it's like I love watching YouTube videos. That's how I learn, right? So I'll put podcasts and I'll do it. But I'm not making myself bad and wrong for it, but I have an awareness of it, because if I get into a season where I'm like, oh, I want to get this done, I can't bitch and complain that I'm not getting it done when I open screen time on my phone and I'm spending 2 hours a day doing something exactly opposite of what I say I want to get done. And so I think there's this like lack of integrity with time. Number one, it's a paradigm of the country, because attention is the number one commodity that's being monetized, and everybody thinks they own their own attention, but you don't. And when you can start to collapse this relationship and understand that we all have time, and it's okay if you want to use an hour of it to watch sports or to go play on YouTube or to numb out with a game on your phone. But the most important part is that an hour later, you can't bitch to me that you don't have time or that you couldn't get it done. I'd rather you say, hey, I chose not to do it because brick out on my phone was so much more fucking fun. And I'm like, great. But when you start to tune your mind into that and you start to develop that relationship integrally, it puts you in a position of power. Right? It puts you in a massive position of power, because then it boils down to choice. Like I'm not running a $100 million company a year because I can't. No, there's still time in my day that I could use it better, but I'm choosing not to use it. But in 6 months, if something comes up and I get in a sprinting mode, well, guess what? That app's getting deleted off my phone. The YouTube videos are going away, and I will just put the fucking blinders on and I'll sprint. And so I think we also have to recognize that we have to have a very integrous, healthy relationship with time as well. And the dissonance that I see is typically where it collapses. And I'll tell you why. Like with my mastermind students, my one-on-one clients, they hate me for this. But when they pay me and they hire me, for the first 30 days, I make them track their time. And I mean, granularly track their time. And by about day 5, I'm getting a whole lot of fuck you. I get the point. I don't want to do this anymore. And I'm like, nope, 30 days. And then by then they're like, okay, got it. Okay, got it. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think there's also this disillusion that everything we do is work or everything is focus time. I'm massively productive. Like when I post my wins on Facebook, occasionally you've seen them. I'm like, oh, I got this done in 4 hours. Bro, the amount of DMs I get that they're like, there's no way you didn't do that. How do you do that? And I'm like, well, I've trained that muscle to be focused. And if I have to be focused and I got to get it done, I'll get it done. But it's not like that every day. But we all can have a better relationship with time. And the more integrous it is, the better. And so in the corporate world, right, you work in 9 to 5, but you have a job, you have KPIs you have to meet, you have responsibilities you have to meet. And outside of meetings, you're in control of your world. There's nothing saying that you can't get all that shit done on the first 2 days of the week and use that time later. But what I see is like, let me go look at your browsing history on your work computer, fucker, right? Let me see where you're spending your time, right? I used to be an IT guy, so I used to look at people's browsing history. And I don't expect my employees or my staff to like work 9 hours a day. I'm like, I expect them to own the outcome. And if the outcome's getting done, I don't ask any questions. But for us as like an N1 experiment, or like for us to do it on our own, is that if we bring an awareness to where we are spending our time, right? It's like, maybe you don't have 90 minutes to work out. Great. Do a 20-minute HIIT workout and smoke yourself. And I just bought you an hour of time to focus on your supplement company, right? And the more we're willing to dance with that conversation and to collapse the lies that especially men tell ourselves, right? Like, oh, I'm doing it, or my honey-do list, like bullshit, man. You can get that honey-do list done in 20 fucking minutes. But you want to be out in the garage because what you're refusing to say is that you want the time to process, to just be alone, to feel disconnected for a while. And so instead of saying, hey, babe, I need an hour to myself, you're like, yeah, babe, I'll do it. And then you go waste 2 fucking hours doing it because you're not being integrous with how you feel.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's this massive conversation around it that's huge. Like I cried to my wife last night because I was feeling really sick. Like I was on the couch, I was down and out. And my wife's like, relax. And I started crying. And I didn't say like, oh, make me feel better. I'm like, I'm crying because I feel guilty, because I feel like I'm not providing, that I could be doing X, Y, and Z. And I realize none of this is yours. So please don't respond. And then she fucking smirks at me, gives me a shit-eating grin. Right. And then I go to stand up and she's like, sit the fuck down. I'm like, okay, baby. Right. And then, but it comes from integrity. And I think, and I'm just going to speak and I'm going to make a blanket statement. I think for men, we're fucking petrified of being honest about our feelings. We're petrified about saying what's actually on our mind.
Mm-hmm.
But really, when we think about masculine leadership, when we think about presence, that's what the world wants from us. That's what our spouses want from us. That's what our kids want from us. And it's our willingness to have that integrous relationship with it and speak authentically and to speak honestly that gives us that ability. Because I'm going to tell you what happened. I said that to my wife, bro, and all the emotions went away. And then this morning I felt like fucking Mighty Mouse. And I was like, I'm going to do this, right? Because like I wasn't holding on to this weight. There wasn't anything that wasn't unspoken. I wasn't like, oh, I lied by not telling the truth. I was honest about my feelings. And then I don't need to go take 2 hours on the honey-do list or say I'm going to the gym for 2 hours, but yet you sit in your fucking car for 40 minutes and numb out on your phone because you're on an Instagram, right? And so it's collapsing all of that. And really integrity is one of the core principles under all of it. But I think it's a massive thing for us to take a look at.
Yeah, no, and I love that, George. I really do. I mean, I can't even think of like the words that come back to that. This is so powerful of like actually being integrous with your word, integrous with your time. And the point that you made too about like, you're not working freaking 8 hours a day. Like you're not, like, I don't care if you're sitting at the office, you know, or if you're working from home, whatever, like there's time. Right. And you're beholden to those outcomes. And as long as you get those outcomes done, like who gives a shit what you do with your time? At least that's my perspective. Right.
Totally. And listen, if you're listening to this and you happen to be like a manual laborer, I'm not talking to you.
Yeah.
I'm not. I know you fucking crush, right? If you're laying brick, if you're mixing cement, like I'm not talking to you. But like for years, I convinced myself that I worked so much harder than I did. And I got challenged by some of my mentors and coaches. And I was like, fuck. And they're like, you want to know what the worst part is? That you're measuring it on how hard you work rather than the outcome you create. Because I look at your quote unquote 8 hours and you could get it done in an hour. I'm like, oh, fuck. All right, cool. But once I started to understand that, now what I get is like my team. I mean, you've been to my event. Mm-hmm. My team at the end of every night, they're like, how do you do this? Like you just go, go, go. And I was like, because I have that capacity when I know how I want to use it. But I don't use that every day. But I have an awareness of where I spend my time. And yeah, like I get trapped in YouTube holes. I get trapped in the endless scroll. Luckily, I really despise social media, like viscerally. And so I don't worry about getting trapped in that. But I will totally get trapped down like a fucking YouTube rabbit hole where I end up knowing the most random facts about everything. Or I'm watching videos that have no relevance to my life. I'm like, oh, I needed to numb out for a little while. And then, but here's a good litmus test. My wife walks in the door and she's like, what are you doing? Most men, myself included, used to be nothing. Oh, nothing, just playing on my phone, right? And then now she walks in, I'm like, babe, I've been stuck in this rabbit hole for 90 fucking minutes about the stupidest bullshit you can imagine. And she just looks at me and smirks. And you want to know what's funny? It makes her lean in because I'm being integrous. And then you know what's funny? Is in that moment, I don't want to do it anymore. I'm like, oh, I'm done. Thanks for the pattern interrupt, right? But it always comes down to this like integrity piece around it. And I think the biggest one is being integrous to myself. Because like, go look at my YouTube watch history. You'll laugh your fucking ass off. It is the most random, non-work, like not helping me be better, like nothing bad. But it's like, do I really need to watch you do off-road recovery for 6 hours today? Because like, that's one of my favorite YouTube channels. Is Matt's Off-Road Recovery, and they live in Utah, and all they do is go rescue off-roaders that get stuck. And it's like this wholesome family. And it's so much that I got my wife hooked on it one night, and one weekend we watched 7 hours of this guy's YouTube videos and all they're doing it. And I was like, cool, right? But there's this integrity that comes with it because like I get to love my life and the choices that I make. And like, that's a choice I'm choosing to make. And the more honest and integrous I am with it, the better it is for everybody. And then like I'll go in a season and I won't watch any of it. Like,
Yeah.
but it's that integrity piece that comes down to all of it. And same thing with my kids, right? Like Branson, I'm big on integrity. Like same thing in my company. Like my company rules are simple. Like if you work for me, there's only 2 ways to get fired. You lie to me or steal from me. Everything else is a leadership challenge on me. We might get to a mutual understanding that like this isn't working, but I'm not gonna be like, oh, you're out, right? But Branson's the same way. And literally it's to the point where I'm afraid of his honesty because he's so honest. But at the same time, it's something that's rewarded to where like if I ask him to do something that's really, really important, and I'm like, hey, bud, did you do it? He'll look me dead in the eye, be like, no, dad, I didn't want to do it. I wanted to play with this instead, so I didn't. And I'm like, I get to reward this behavior. Like he's being honest with me, he's being open with me, and he's basically asserting what he wants to do. Right.
Yeah.
But like that's kind of an ethos that we carry through. And I have to thank my wife for that. Like my wife is the walking definition of integrity. I mean, like to the point where like there was a source of tension in our marriage a couple of years ago. If she's like, hey, will you do this? I'm like, yeah, I'll do it in an hour. And she's like, don't lie to me. And I'm like,
oh shit.
and I was like, oh, right. Or I would be like, oh yeah, baby, it took me 30 minutes. And she's like, no, it didn't. And I was like, oh yeah, you're right. It took me 19. Right. And like, there was this really hard line. And it's one of the best lines that was ever held with me because I never realized how much I was embellishing in numbers. And she used to listen to me on podcasts and she's like, did you really do that number? And I was like, what did I say? And I'm like, oh, fuck. And I'm like, well, close. And she's like, but it was that number. I'm like, no, it wasn't. Thank you. And then I call him. I'm like, hey, man, I said a wrong number on your podcast. He's like, what? Are you correcting that? I'm like, I am. He's like, dude, nobody's going to care.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
right.
I care.
I care. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's why, like at the event, like I'm the first one to acknowledge. I'm like, oh, that was for my ego. I'm like, oh, nope, it wasn't that number. I'm like, I didn't really do that. Right. And I try to hold myself accountable to that. But it's fucking empowering at how easy my life is, even in the most tumultuous of times, losing millions of dollars, losing a company, having deals fall through, that if I protect that integrity and my authenticity, everything else gets fucking easy. Everything, because I'm constantly standing on solid ground.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I love doing that with your son Branson too, about like him just telling you the truth, right? Like, that's one of the things I try to instill in my kids too, is like, hey, you're going to tell me the truth. And if we don't like it, then we'll talk about it. Right. But like,
sure.
What I don't want you doing though, is lying to me like that. That is going to be inexcusable. We will get in trouble. That happens. But if you tell me the truth, again, you're going to be seen, you're going to be heard, you're going to be understood, you're going to be accepted. And then we can have a conversation about it. Right.
For sure.
So love that, man. I want to shift gears to like, I feel like we agree on a lot of the same things about fatherhood. But I want to have this discussion kind of take a turn towards where dad's failing right now, as you just kind of look broadly across society. The key kind of pillar behind the business that I have is that, our culture has been declining, and it's because of the failure of leadership of fathers. And so if we look back, it's taken 40 to 50 years to get to this point. And, it's going to take us being the type of dad that we know we should be, instilling the values we know we should to our kids, again, to kind of use that match parable, right? Is it's kind of burning. We're going to remove one down, and then it's going to continue forward. So it's going to take us like 40 to 50 years to get to where we need to go, but it starts now. But, just looking back at history, and right now, like, where do you see dads getting it wrong, and where can they, try to improve?
Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna answer this differently than I would normally answer, because normally I'd be like, oh, this is what I see. I'm gonna tell you what I did.
Yeah.
I had self-entitlement and a lack of responsibility.
Okay.
And that was the biggest problem, right? Like, this is happening to me. I just deserve this. Like, just because we're married, my wife should stay with me. Just because I have kids, they should love me. And there was this sense of entitlement that was there, that like somehow that what I had every day, I didn't have to earn anymore. Mm-hmm. And then a lack of self-responsibility. Like when things show up, oh, that's somebody else, or that was my kid's teachers, or that's the school's job, or that's her job, or my wife should have done it. Shut the fuck up. Like at the end of the day, it comes down to ownership and realizing that like we have to create what we want. So like I have a really simple philosophy for me that holds me accountable. Every morning I wake up, I start from I lost my business, I lost my wife, and I lost my kids every single morning. And my job that day is to earn them back every single fucking day. And there's days that I fail and there's days that I succeed.
Dude, I
But
love that.
for me, those killed me. Thinking like, oh, like if my wife's unhappy, somehow I would gaslight her back rather than being like, I hear you, here's what I'll do. And for me, it was a fear of my power. And not power as like I'm asserting my dominance or my alpha over you, but power of like, if it's up to be, it's up to me, right? Like small unit leadership down to the core of what it is, or as Jocko calls 100% ownership, or you pick the one that you want to utilize. But Jim, my buddy Jim Quick says this all the time. He says, you can't get upset about results you don't have from the work you didn't do.
Yeah.
Well, the inverse of that is that I don't need to get upset at myself for the feedback I'm getting, but it's up to me to fix it. And I get to earn it every single day. If I want my house to look better, I don't give a fuck how many times I say to my wife, hey, can you pick up? Hey, it's not going to solve it because I'm projecting it out and advocating the responsibility of it and having a sense of entitlement that somehow my wife owes me to keep a house clean. And my wife keeps the house clean, but I'm just using an example. It's up to me, always up to me, whether it's I hire somebody, whether it's I fix it myself, whether it's I lead by example. And kids don't listen to what we say. They watch everything we fucking do all day. And I didn't learn this with my daughter, but I've learned it with my son because he mimics behaviors exponentially greater than anything I've ever seen. And it's beautiful to watch. But I also think about the times where I'm just like vegging out on the couch and I'm like, God, I'm exhausted. But rather than being like, hey, I'm exhausted, I'm going to go do breath work. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to go lay down. I'm going to go journal. I'm like, oh, Netflix. And like, I hold myself accountable to that now. And it's like my example does everything. And I know that I probably have 3 hours left in my day, every single day, that I could sharpen my edge, that I could be stronger, that I could do more in business and more as father. And I'm not trying to get rid of it all overnight, but I'm realizing there's plenty of ground for me to cover. As long as I don't think that the world owes me anything, my kids owe me anything, my wife owes me anything, or my businesses owe me anything, but I owe myself to earn that shit every single day. And no matter which way we slice it, I find myself gossiping sometimes, projecting out or being like, well, if they did this and they did that, I'm like, but what the fuck am I doing? Right? Because like all that energy that I'm like, oh, well, he did that or they did that, or I didn't like how that meeting went, could also go to, well, here's what I'm going to do differently next time to create a different result. And like, that's the biggest thing that I see. And it's funny too, because if I was answering this question at a 30,000 foot view, I'd say presence. A presence comes from self-ownership and eliminating the entitlement to be responsible. It requires presence, right? And presence is not being on fucking social media and being wrapped up into everybody else's story and giving a fuck what's happening in somebody else's family or somebody else's business. Like, what the fuck is happening in yours? That's what I want to know about, right? And that's what I hold myself to, is like, I can't control the outcome, but I can always control the input. And if I don't like what's showing up, I can bitch about it all day, but it's still not going to change the result unless I own the input and control the circle that I can control. And I think that that's one of the biggest things, because at the root of it, that's where disconnection comes from. That's where entitlement comes from. That's where a lack of presence comes from. It's when we're basically mentally masturbating to all the other shit in the world, which is advocating us from doing the shit that we can control. And that's what I come back to. Like, I come back to the same thing. Did I move my body today? Did I do my meditation? Did I journal? Did I fill my bucket? Did I earn my wife back? Did I earn my kids today? Did I earn my business? And here's the thing. You have to fucking earn it. Just because you have a ring on your finger, just because something is there, just because somebody says yes, it's not yes forever. It's yes under the context that this is the contract that we're creating and it requires work to fucking keep it. And like, that's the way that I see it for myself. Because if I had to collapse all challenges, all struggles, our separations, when my wife made me move out, when I lived in hotels, when I lost millions of dollars, all of it came from feeling like a victim and thinking that somehow the fucking world owed it to me. The world doesn't owe it to me. I owe it to me.
I love that, man. The kind of a blank slate, right? At the beginning of the morning, you know?
Every day, man.
Because you do. I mean, you really do, right? Like, I'm so guilty of this, and I think everyone is, right? Of just kind of like skating along, You know, I'm going to take it for granted. Like my wife's always going to be there. My kids are always going to be there. They're always going to love me, you know, but no, man, like you need to put in the work every day to earn them back. I'm going to come to one example too, because this one like really hit home with me, and it happened, I don't know, maybe about 2 months ago or so. And this was, not usually, I am the one that does the dishes at the house. And like, I offer to do that. One, cause I know my wife hates it. But then two, like I want to be able to do my part, you know, like I'm gonna help take care of the house, etc. And, I gotten home, from work late one day, and, you know, we've got a 4-month-old, right? So it's just like super exhausting, like bottles everywhere, like not sleeping in the night and stuff. And the dishes were dirty, at the end of the day, super tired. I told myself, all right, I'm just gonna go to bed. I'll wake up early before I head into work, and I'll knock the dishes out, right? And then so I do wake up early. I get ready to go to work. I look at the dishes, and I don't do them, and I just leave and go to work. And I tell you what, man, like I don't think I've cried, you know, as much over the past like probably years as I did that day that I left the dishes there, because I was advocating my responsibility. I was putting myself first, right, as opposed to my family, and that just hit hard with me, man. And it just brings it back to your point of like every day, you know, you can't take it for granted. Like you've got to earn that. You got to earn that right back every day.
Mm-hmm. And like I'll say something, because like that happens. It happened to me this morning.
Mm.
It happened to me this morning. The distinction is how we own it and how we communicate it. Because then I'm like, hey babe, by the way, I didn't take the trash out because I was being lazy, and I'll do it when I get home. Versus like, I forgot. Like, no, that's a fucking lie. Like,
I just didn't do it. Yeah.
I looked at it and I'm like, I'm not fucking doing this right now. Yeah. No, right? And it's so funny though, because even that level of integrity is empowering. Because it's solid ground. And like, that's it. Like, none of us are perfect, man. Our buckets get empty. Our capacity gets empty. Like, all of that stuff happens. It's how we distinguish it. It's how we communicate about it. It's how we go about it. I mean, why do you think I use fucking paper plates all the time? I hate doing dishes, right? Like, I fucking hate it. And it's so funny. I'm totally okay with a sink full of dishes and loading the dishwasher, but once they're clean, I fucking hate emptying them.
Really?
I'm also the king of like washing and drying my clothes and then leaving them on my bureau because I hate hanging them up, right? Like, I know my proclivities all day. So like, one of my son's nannies, I'm like, hey, when you're done with his, and I pay her for this, I'm like, will you hang my clothes on the hangers, please? She's like, yeah, I totally got you. Sweet, thank you. Solved, right? Like, just building this ecosystem that like supports me being in my power. And yeah, it's fun. And then, you know, it's also like great humor points. Like this morning I looked at my wife and I was like, hey baby, I didn't know I married the Tasmanian devil. And she's like, ha ha ha. I'm like, no, come here, beautiful, right? And I gave her a kiss and I looked at her, and then, you know, she's like, you know, I do need to pick up. I'm like, no, you don't, baby. I was just messing around because I'm not picking up my shit either. And then we like had a jovial moment about it, rather than a source of tension and disconnection and blame and, you know, things like that. And we're human, man. Like, we're human. When you have kids, I never realized that having a kid meant I was basically going to solve all of my OCD cleanliness instantaneously, because no matter what you do, every car, every room,
there's always a mess, dude. Always. Yeah.
Bro, I have like war wounds. Like, I need a Purple Heart for being a parent from the amount of Legos and toy cars that have like
thank
cut
God
my
we're
foot.
not at the Lego stage yet. Yeah.
Or trip down the stairs, right? Or even like my techie OCD, because I'm a techie guy, right? And I'm like, don't touch the laptop on my screen. And my son's iPad has like 3 weeks worth of food residue on it, right?
Like
I'm like,
dried yogurt on it.
and he's like, Dad, my iPad doesn't work. And I'm like dry heaving in my mouth a little bit. And I'm like, oh my God, okay, I'll clean it, right? And it's like, but I love that my son doesn't have that relationship with it. It's just a toy for him, right? And I'm like, okay, that's mine too. And I think it really just boils down to like the integrity around it, having the fun in there, and then how we handle it, right? Like, no matter what. Like I've also been the king of like, yeah, baby, I'll do it. And then that shit goes in one, out the other. And then over a certain amount of time, she's like, I don't feel safe with you. I don't trust you. And like, what do you want to be like? Well, you should. No, you shouldn't.
Yeah.
Of course you shouldn't. Because no matter how small or how big, I said yes and I didn't do it. So I had to learn how to document those things in my life. And I'm the king of texting myself. I have the longest text message thread with myself ever. Because if I say yes to something, I immediately open my phone and I text myself. I'm like, hey, go fix the horse trailer this weekend. Put this into place. Boom, boom, boom. And then when I come to the office and I'm getting my day ready, part of that includes synthesizing down my honey-do list and making sure I can be integrous with what I said yes to. Same thing with my son. He's like, Dad, you said we'd ride bikes then. I'm like, we are riding bikes. And I'm like, fuck, I forgot. Okay, moving the schedule. Delete.
I can't tell you how many times that happens with my kids. It's like, I'm just like in the moment, like not thinking, whatever, and not being present, right? And then they say, hey, like, can we do this later? I'm like, yeah, we'll do it later. We'll do it later. And then, come around like 3 or 4 o'clock. They're like, hey, you said we're going to ride bikes. And I'm like, oh, shit, I did say that. Like, all right, let's do it, because otherwise I'm not being integrated with my word.
Let's go, right? And like, and that's the thing. Like, our kids love us. But like, I won't ever tell my son, I won't be like, oh, I forgot. I'm like, you know what, buddy? I did say that, and I got distracted, and I didn't make it important, and you were super important. So let's go on a bike ride. And it's just showing that example over and over, but it comes down to that presence over and over, because there's also plenty of times like, he's like, I want to do this. I'm like, great, after you eat. And I'm like, are you ready to go? And he's like, I don't want to do it anymore. I want to watch my iPad. I'm like, all right, cool. Let's go. Right. Like, it's just really living in that integrous moment, being in the moment, making adjustments, being honest about it all the time, and then doing the best that we can. Like, we're all going to get empty, man. Like, you have 3 kids under 6. You are running a business. You have a corporate job. You're doing a podcast. Like, you're a superhuman. But even superheroes need love. They need recovery. They need downtime. They need stuff. And it's like also collapsing this delusion that like we have to be perfect all the time. Like, in my opinion, perfect is integrous. Like, that's the easiest pass that you get. Like, perfection just comes from integrity. Like, that's it. Like, we can't be perfect. We can make progress. We can control what we can control. And then we do the best that we can to make adjustments. And it's really the only way to live, in my opinion, at least for me. Because now that I'm healthy and healed and not attempting my life and I'm an addict, it's the way that I get to live every day that makes me feel the most empowered. And like, it still happens. Like, when I'm on the road, like, I go to Austin once a month to run one of my big companies. And like, I'm out having fun and surfing with my friends, and I have guilt, right? My wife doesn't have guilt. She's fucking stoked that I'm having fun and filling my bucket. But then I've caught myself. She's like, what are you going to do? I'm like, I'm going to go back to the hotel and work. I'm like, wait, no, I'm going to go back to the hotel and veg out on the TV for 2 hours till I go to bed. She's like, oh yeah, babe, you must be exhausted. Go. Right. But there's this level of like, oh, I want to control how the world sees me, or have it be a certain way, versus like how it really is. And it's a muscle. And the more we flex it and the more we practice it, the better we get. And I'm a very simple human being. That's why I wear hoodies that say unapologetically authentic. It's to hold myself accountable and remind myself every time I look in the mirror, like, are you being honest? Are you being authentic? Like, is that how you really feel? And then being willing to like make adjustments and own it and clean it up and like live like that. I think it's the best way to live.
Yeah. Well, George, I hope that this has been a fun conversation that's a little bit different than what you're used to on the marketing side.
Oh, it's always fun when we talk, man. Of course. Yeah. I love that shit.
Well, dude, I'm gonna let you go, man. I know you're busy, but I want you to tell people where they can find you, and I'll do links on social and all that stuff. And I know you've got an event coming up in October. Is that right?
Oh yeah. So I'll say the easiest thing. The easiest thing is to find my podcast or my Instagram. So podcast is called The Mind of George Show. It's on every platform. We talk about mindset, business, entrepreneurship, relationships, customer journey. Basically talk about everything. Everyone seems to love it, so I'm going to keep doing it. So it's called The Mind of George Show. And then my Instagram, which Drew will link it, it's George Bryant. But if I can help you, if I open any loops, if you need anything, just shoot me a DM. And that includes like if you want to come to the event's designed for entrepreneurs that either want to start a business or have a business, like scale their customer journey, develop a rock solid mindset, all those fun things. But the easiest way is just to shoot me a DM on Instagram. I will get back to you. I will help you. I will guide you in whatever direction, including anything that you come up with, I'll find a solution for. So that's the best way to get a hold of me.
Yeah. And George, you are spot on with DMs, man. And just thank you for being an incredible human, being an inspiration for me on the business side, but then also, being a dad too. I think one of the biggest takeaways I had from the event was something that was not intentional from you, but it just lasting impact on was when you were on stage and your son Branson came up. And you were literally like mid-speech, like, talking about something, customer journey, whatever. And he comes out of nowhere, kind of run up the stage, and he just lays his hand on you, right? And you lay your hand right back on him. And that to me, like, I know where you got it from too. It's from Bluey. And yep. I was like, that is genius, because again, going back to kids just want to make sure they're seen and heard, right? And so although, hey, Branson, hey kid, like I'm doing my work right now, but I acknowledge you, I see you. and you're important to me, right? And as soon as I'm done, I'm going to give you my full attention. And so I think that was huge. And like you didn't mean to do that, to leave that impression, but it left it on me. So I want to thank you for that.
Man, I love that. Well, thanks for doing this, man. I know you're in relaxing time with the fam, so go fill the bucket, go be present. I appreciate you, man. And then let me know if I can do anything to support you.
Absolutely. Thanks, George. And guys, we will see you on the next episode.